turn your life around. As the name implies, it's the kind of change being offered to prostitutes here on the Suncoast. For more than 3 years, a new approach has been to recognize these women and men as victims instead of criminals. That work is paying off. Last month, Sarasota County sentenced a human trafficker for the first time. And joining us for more on this effort is Sergeant Robert Armstrong of the Street Crimes Unit at the Sarasota Police Department, Misty LaPierre, Outreach Coordinator for Sailor Freedom, and Craig Schaefer, Chief Assistant State's Attorney for the 12th Judicial Court. This is really an amazing program, and as we saw in Kate's piece, we could see the results. And a number of questions is where did the idea come from to change how you attack the issue of prostitution?
The idea came from, we just realized it wasn't working when they were arresting the women. They were coming back through the system, and we knew that there was an underlying story and that they really needed more effort and more services from us. And so we began the TILA program.
And Craig, so previously, if a woman was arrested for prostitution once, twice, or a number of times, there was different approaches, just like for any other crime.
It was just like we would look at the paper file. We would see this is the second time, and she got 30 days the second time, or this is the third time, now she's getting 90 days, and the numbers would just keep going up. The legislature, the Florida legislature, passed laws that made third-time prostitution felonies. So we would prosecute those accordingly to the sentencing score sheets, and they would get more time, and there was a less focus on rehabilitation and what the real problems were with these women.
So what happens now, starting from the point that the woman encounters a police officer on the street?
Well, the Street Crimes Unit, we currently do daily contact, so we're out there in the street every day, and we're contacting them, getting to know them, and developing rapport. So it starts with the rapport building. You know, so a lot of the women that we deal with, that we actually catch in a sting, we already know who they are. So I think we're developing a lot of trust with them. So if in fact they are a sex trafficking victim, it really helps us to have that trust up front.
Well, let me ask you right there. So let's say there's a sting. Do you arrest the woman, or do you immediately put them into the other program?
When we do a prostitution sting, we bring the woman that we've arrested in the sting, we bring her to a substation. At that point, we vet her out as far as if she has warrants for her arrest or felony drugs on her. So there are some criteria where they do have to go to jail. But we're not really trying to do that at all. We really want to continue that rapport building and put them into the TILA diversion program and divert them from the criminal justice system.
And how does that program work?
The TILA program works, so from that first point of contact, we go to court, let me back up. They go to detox from that first point of contact if they need those services. So if they need to be medically detoxed from drugs, they go there. And within 24 to 48 hours, a representative from Sailor Freedom goes in and meets with them and lets them know about our programming and what's available to help them to be able to exit the life. And then we also go with them to court for each of their court hearings and update the judge and update the court on how they're doing.
Let me ask you this. We just had really in the last couple of weeks the first conviction of somebody for human trafficking in Sarasota County. How did this program translate to that prosecution and conviction?
That case would have never been prosecuted in the past.
Why?
Because you wouldn't have had a victim willing or able to go through the process, the court process and the deposition process. If that victim was not in the TILA program where she was in a safe house and received the counseling and treatment she needed, and we're not talking just drug treatment, we're talking about all the PTSD treatment and all the victimization treatment she was dealing with, she would have never been able to capably testify to what she testified to.
It took an incredible amount of courage for that young woman to testify against somebody who she both had a relationship with and also feared.
Correct, and I think that started with what Sergeant Armstrong had said, that rapport and building it on the streets with her and being able to really get to know them. We know that sometimes it takes 7 to 8 points of contact working with the victim before they're ready to exit the life. So being able to have that street contact is very important.
Okay, there is so much more to talk about here, but first we're going to take a quick break, and then when we return we'll have a look at your weather forecast. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the collaboration between the state's attorney's office, Sarasota Police Department, and Sailor Freedom to combat human trafficking on the Suncoast. And our guests tonight are Sergeant Robert Armstrong, Missy LaPierre of Sailor Freedom, and Chief Assistant State's Attorney Craig Schaefer. First, let's give everybody the context. How big of an issue is it, both here in Sarasota, and why do we keep on hearing that Florida is one of the biggest states in the nation in terms of prostitution?
One of the reasons that it's one of the biggest hubs is because we have all these major football, baseball, sporting events going on. We're a tourist industry, so we have a lot of people that have that mentality that what happens here stays here. They can come and do whatever and go out. We're also one of the highway hubs as far as women going to and from different states.
And in terms of arrests, I don't know if you could categorize prostitution arrests at this point, because I would imagine it's going down. But is there a way that we could let people know how many cases there are a year in Sarasota, how many prosecutions?
Well, we've obviously changed the platform of how we're doing these cases. You know, the Street Crimes Unit does at least one operation a month. We may detain, 5 to 7 girls in a couple hours. So when we have them, that's when we start that whole process, and then they go into the Tyler court system if they go into the Tyler program.
Right, and you're also arresting the Johns.
We are. We're aggressively prosecuting the Johns. There's legislation that allows that, and we are strict enforcers of that as well.
How many cases a year in just your judicial circuit?
I don't have the numbers, Alan. Whenever they do stings to get the girls into the Tyler program, there's similar stings for the Johns. It could be 10 a month, 7 a month. I don't know if that number sounds about right.
And could you talk for a moment about the trauma that these women, young women, go through because something happened to bring them to where they are?
Absolutely, Alan. A lot of times people think these girls are out there simply because of a drug addiction, or that they want to be in the life. And what we have found is in almost all the cases with the women that we have worked with, there has been some childhood sexual abuse or trauma that has interrupted their life. And it's a continuation that goes into adulthood without the proper treatment.
And Sergeant, so I would imagine when this program started going forward, that you and your officers had to almost re-educate yourselves about how you approach women almost from the get-go.
Well, absolutely. Dating 20 years back when I started, we didn't have any type of training at all in human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, especially prostitution operations that would result in a diversion program. We were trained to actually arrest the prostitute. So now every police officer at the Sarasota Police Department is trained. We all go through a 4-hour training about the Tyler diversion program. We just recently, every time we have a new recruit batch come through, we train all those guys and girls the same exact thing. So all of the officers at the Sarasota Police Department are trained on prostitution diversion in this particular program that we're using.
The obvious question here is, if this is working in Sarasota County, are you all getting calls from jurisdictions outside the area saying, yes, what are you doing and how do you do it?
I constantly get calls. I know Selah does. Elizabeth Fisher and Misty over at Selah get calls. I'd say every couple weeks, another circuit. There's 20 judicial circuits around the state. I get calls every couple weeks from attorneys there handling whatever their issues are, and they call us about how we're incorporating this program, because this is the first program of its kind in the state of Florida. It really, truly was a visionary program by Sarasota Police Department, Selah, and the state attorney's office.
And is this a program that costs money?
We're not seeing any of it.
Yeah.
Which is it's a tough issue here in Florida, because the legislature is trying to rein in spending, not increase in
Right.
most any form. So how is your organization funded? Where do you look to?
Yeah, we are funded through private donations, community foundations, and through some state grant money.
And, has that funding level been steady, or are there any hopes of it increasing? And if so, where would you invest it?
Well, we have that's a tough question to answer, Alan, because I don't oversee that part of things.
I could speak for our office. I know SPD doesn't have extra funding.
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift for them as well as us on how we handle our cases. Our office doesn't, we're just using our current attorneys and staff to handle these cases. I know the Public Defender's Office, Larry Eager's office, hasn't received any funding about this, and also the bench, the court administration, Judge Quartermain, who volunteered to handle this program for all of us. They're not receiving extra funding at this point. So it's an extra specialty court that's being self-funded essentially by the parties.
So I would imagine that it in many ways, it is a role model because none of your agencies or organizations are receiving, it doesn't cost taxpayers, it doesn't cost organizations increased money, yet you are seeing a decline in terms of arrests and cases going through the system. And you now have something to point to, the first arrest of a human trafficker. So how do you see this going on beyond Sarasota and really kind of changing the way things are done, at least around Florida?
Well, we're starting to get contacted by law enforcement agencies all over the United States. And they'll call me on the phone and say, hey, we saw you guys on the news. What are you doing and how are you doing that? So those calls are coming in. I tell Misty we need more Misties because we rely heavily on the services that Sail Freedom provides.
And what happens to someone like the young woman in Kate's story who had that horrific experience, is trying to get her life together? What is her next step?
So she came into safe housing with us, and what she's working on right now is her education, but we did a lot of therapy for her, a lot of trauma therapy, horse therapy, art therapy, so she went through a lot with our staff.
And Craig, we talked about this in the break, there is a law of supply and demand. So what can you do about those people who are out there who are looking for prostitution? You said earlier there is not the same kind of diversion effort. Where do you go from there?
Well, in one way there is. I mean, there's harsh laws. The legislature, I think, recognizes that the Johns are pushing the problem. They're the demand. But there's also a diversionary program. We've partnered with another organization, which is basically an 8-hour education class for anybody arrested for solicitation. And it has very high success rates. It's modeled after a California and Minnesota model. So these men who are getting arrested for solicitation, yes, they're getting prosecuted through the system, but if it's their first offense, they have a chance to divert as well if they go through this program as well. So it's education. It's an education program for them because we want them to stop wanting to buy prostitutes.
And there are different forms of prostitution. There is not only the women who walk the street, and we should also say the men who walk the street, but it's also online and in publications. And I know that's a kind of a vexing problem to take on.
There's a massive problem online. I mean, it's huge. We obviously can't do it alone. We're starting to do some new innovative techniques where we still do the same philosophies of diversion. So we have kind of changed our shift on the investigations that we're doing online. So, we have a 3-pronged thing where we were calling them on the phone and meeting with them and making a criminal case, to not having much success in that, and it takes a lot of time to do that, to just simply calling them on the phone and offering them services over the phone. They were absolutely blindsided that law enforcement and an organization was calling to just help them.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there for that moment, but when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about Friday's topic, sanctuary cities. Welcome back. In recent years, law enforcement and our local court system have embraced a new perspective on human trafficking, recognizing prostitutes as victims and taking new steps to bring traffickers to justice. How can we continue to build on this progress? Our guests join us now for final thoughts. Sergeant, where do you go from here? What can you be doing that you're not yet doing, and how effective has this change in thinking been?
It's been very effective, and where we go from here is we keep working hard. So every day we come up with new ideas of how we can reach more women. If we're picking up the phone and simply calling girls that are advertising online, that's a win for us. So we are trying to reach as many girls as we can. We're staying very active, very busy. We're doing the heavy enforcement on the traffickers and the Johns, and we're also doing the enforcement with any hotel or motel involved, as well as saunas.
And Misty, the more women that you get off the street, the more room you will need to house them. So,
correct.
What's the future there, and what do you need, and how can people who are watching this right now help?
Well, we recently launched this year, so we have safe housing in the Southeast here, and we also have it in the Midwest. But ideally, being able to have additional beds here in the Southeast would really help for us to be able to house more women.
Can donate a house, or property.
We'd always welcome a donated house or property.
And Craig, has the courts and the law in Florida kept up with the change in thinking among prosecutors?
Honestly, there was a paradigm shift for our office probably about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and I think the legislation, just working with Attorney General Bondi, you've seen a change in legislation about expunging records, criminal histories of girls that were victims. We have training, constant training for our prosecutors. I think we have a new training next month or a couple weeks from now, actually. So we're training our folks as well, just so they're aware as prosecutors that most of these women are victims of crimes, and we need to start treating them that way. The legislation, I think, is definitely state of the art compared to the rest of the country.
Well, very quickly, because we're running out of time, but do you foresee changing the criminal statutes involving prostitution to meet this?
I think there's options already in the statutes, the way they're written, and there's discretion. And I think I don't know what the legislature will move forward towards, but it's clearly going that way. Okay. It's clearly going that way.
Before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about Friday's topic, sanctuary cities. There is an estimated 300 cities and counties and states that meet the definition of sanctuary city here in the U.S., meaning they have policies against enforcing federal immigration policies. 7 Florida counties are included on that list. President-elect Donald Trump is calling for Congress to block federal funding to these jurisdictions, an idea supported by Congressman Vern Buchanan. Here is what some of you are saying about the issue. Randy Russell writes, deport all illegals and defund the cities. They are criminals. Kevin Kumanga writes, conservatives should be up in arms about asserting federal control over local governments. And Court Cummings writes, come in illegally and you're more than welcome to the fruits and burdens we all share as Americans. Come in illegally and, well, you're illegal. There should be no sanctuaries for these illegals. If you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Sergeant Robert Armstrong is with the Street Crimes Unit at the Sarasota Police Department. Misty LaPierre is an outreach coordinator for Selah Freedom. And Craig Schaefer is the Chief Assistant State's Attorney with the 12th Judicial Court.